Picture this. You are alone, the vast, unforgiving wilderness stretching out before you like a cruel joke. You are a widow, the echo of your husband's laughter a ghost that haunts the wind. And you are pregnant, carrying the last spark of a love that was stolen from you. The man you once called your everything is gone, reduced to cold earth and colder memories. Now, a storm, black and furious, is gathering on the horizon, a mirror to the tempest in your soul. Your only hope for shelter, the only person for miles, is a reclusive stranger in a secluded cabin. But as you draw closer, you see his face, and a single jagged scar running from his ear to the corner of his mouth sends a bolt of ice through your veins. You recognize it from whispered descriptions, from the taunting words of the man who now owns your husband's debt. This is him. This is the man whose hands, they say, are stained with your beloved's final moments. This is your husband's slayer. Do you turn back into the storm and face certain death? Or do you knock on the door of the monster and pray for mercy? This was the impossible choice facing Alara. Her feet, raw and bleeding inside her worn boots, could carry her no further. The town of Redemption Gulch, a place whose name was the bitterest of ironies, was miles behind her, but its corrupt heart, Mayor Thorne, felt closer than ever. Thorne, with his greedy eyes and ledger-book soul, had owned the mine where her husband, Liam, had worked. He had owned Liam's debt, and after the accident, he believed he owned Alara, too. He saw her not as a grieving widow, but as an asset to be collected, her unborn child just another future laborer for his dynasty of dust and despair. So she had fled, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the fierce, protective love for the life growing within her. Now the sky was tearing open. Rain, cold as a final breath, began to fall. Her vision blurred, the towering pines swaying like specters. With a final, desperate gasp, she collapsed onto the muddy ground, the world dissolving into darkness. She awoke not to the cold forest floor, but to the soft scratch of a wool blanket and the gentle, rhythmic crackle of a fire. A stone hearth, warm and glowing, filled the small cabin with a soft, orange light. Her wet clothes were gone, replaced by a dry, oversized man's shirt. Her boots were by the fire, drying slowly. Fear, sharp and immediate, seized her. She sat up, clutching the blanket to her chest, her eyes darting around the rustic, one-room space. And then she saw him. He was sitting in a simple wooden chair across the room, his back to her, staring into the flames. He was large, broad-shouldered, yet there was a stillness about him, a profound quiet that seemed to absorb all sound. He didn't turn, as if he had sensed her waking but was determined to give her space. "You were freezing," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, like stones shifting deep underground. "The storm will be bad. You can stay till it passes." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. It was him, the man from the whispers, Silas. The scar was hidden by the shadows, but she knew. She could feel the history that clung to him like the scent of pine and wood smoke. She said nothing, her throat tight with 1,000 unspeakable words. He seemed to understand her silence. He rose slowly, retrieved a bowl from a rough-hewn shelf, and ladled a thick, savory stew into it. He placed it on a small stool near her cot, along with a cup of water, before retreating back to his chair by the fire. He asked for nothing. He offered no explanation. He simply provided warmth and nourishment, a silent guardian against the raging storm outside. Alara watched him, torn between the instinct to flee and the primal need for sanctuary. For now, the sanctuary was winning. She ate the stew, the warmth spreading through her chilled body, a temporary truce in a war she was not sure how to fight. The days bled into one another, measured by the rising and setting of a sun she could only see through the cabin's single small window. The storm passed, leaving the world washed clean and glistening, but Alara remained. She was too heavy with child to risk the journey, and a strange, unspoken peace had settled between her and the silent man. Their life fell into a quiet rhythm, a dance of shared space and solitude. Silas would rise before dawn, his movements deliberate and quiet, and leave for the day to check his traps or chop wood. He would leave food for her on the table, a piece of bread, a portion of smoked meat, a handful of dried berries. Alara, in turn, found purpose in the small domestic tasks of the cabin. She swept the floor with a handmade broom, tended the fire, and one afternoon, seeing a tear in the sleeve of his flannel shirt, she took out the small sewing kit she'd carried with her and mended it. When he returned that evening, he saw the repaired shirt folded neatly on his cot. He paused, his gaze lingering on the tidy stitches, and a flicker of some unreadable emotion crossed his face before he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod in her direction. It was the most they had said to each other in a week. Alara began to study him not as a monster, but as a man. She saw the way his large hands could be surprisingly gentle as he carved a piece of wood. She saw the deep, haunting sadness in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking, a sorrow so profound it seemed to be a part of the very landscape of his face. He was a man drowning in a silent sea of grief. One evening, while tidying a small shelf, her fingers brushed against a small, crudely carved object tucked away in the back. It was a wooden bird, a tiny wren with its head cocked to one side. Her breath caught in her throat. It was identical to the one Liam had carved for her on their first anniversary, a token of a promise to always come home. It was his signature, his unique mark. Her blood ran cold. The fragile piece of the cabin shattered. She turned, the wooden bird clutched in her palm, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. Silas was cleaning his rifle by the fire, his movements methodical. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice trembling but clear, cutting through the silence. He stopped, his hands going still. Slowly, he looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He saw the bird in her hand, and the carefully constructed walls around his heart seemed to crumble into dust. The time for silence was over. "His name was Liam," Silas said, his voice thick with an ancient pain. He finally looked at her, truly looked at her, and she saw not a killer, but a man bearing an impossible weight. "He was my friend," he told her everything. They were both indebted to Thorn, trapped in a cycle of work and debt in the dust-choked hell of Redemption Gulch. Thorn, for his own cruel amusement and to make an example of them, had declared their debts would be settled in a fight. Not to the death he'd claimed. Just a show of force, a spectacle for the town. One man would walk away with his debt cleared. But Thorn was a liar. During the staged brawl, Thorn's thugs intervened, escalating the conflict with a viciousness that was never part of the bargain. In the ensuing chaos, in the confusion of dust and shouting and desperation, Liam was struck down, not by Silas, but by the heavy-handed cruelty of Thorn's enforcers. Silas, seeing his friend fall, had lost himself to a protective rage, fighting off the men before kneeling by Liam's side. Liam's last words were not a curse, but a plea. "Alara," he had whispered. "Protect her." Silas had carried his friend's body from that place of betrayal, burying him in a hidden grove, far from the greedy hands of Thorn. The story that Silas was a murderer was a lie Thorn had spun to cover his own tracks and to turn Silas into a pariah, an outcast no one would dare help. He had lived with the guilt, the shame, and the weight of that final promise ever since, his solitary life a penance for a sin he did not truly commit. Alara sank onto the cot, the wooden bird falling from her slackened fingers. Tears streamed down her face. Not tears of rage, but of a shared, bottomless sorrow. She looked at this broken man, and for the first time, she did not see her husband's slayer. She saw his last friend, the man who had honored his final wish. In that moment, her quest for vengeance died, and a new, steely resolve took its place. The real monster wasn't in this cabin. He was sitting on a throne of lies in Redemption Gulch. Just as this new, fragile understanding settled between them, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the mountain's peace. Alara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with terror. Silas was on his feet in an instant, his body a shield between her and the door. Through the window they saw him, Mayor Thorn, astride a fine black horse, a smug, proprietary smile on his face. He was flanked by two of his hired brutes. He didn't dismount like a visitor, but like a king arriving to inspect his property. "Alara," he called out, his voice oily and smooth, a snake slithering through the clean mountain air. "I've come to collect what's mine. Liam's debt is now your debt, a debt to be paid in loyalty. You and the child will come back to town with me. You belong to Redemption Gulch." Silas stepped out of the cabin, placing himself squarely in Thorn's path. He stood taller than Alara had ever seen him, the stoic resignation replaced by a cold, burning fire. "She's not going anywhere," Silas stated, his voice a low growl of thunder. Thorn laughed, a short, ugly sound. "And who are you to stop me? The town killer? Hiding in the woods with another man's wife." He gestured to the cabin. "This land, this cabin, it's all on my claim. You're squatting on my property. Both of you. You'll leave with her, or you'll leave in a pine box. Your choice." The air grew thick with menace. Thorn's men dismounted, their hands resting on the pistols at their hips. This was it. The past had come crashing into their sanctuary. The final debt was about to be paid, not with coin, but with courage. The confrontation that Liam had been forced into was now Silas's to finish. As Thorn's men advanced, Silas moved with a speed that defied his size, using his knowledge of the terrain, of every rock and tree, as a weapon. It wasn't a duel of honor. It was a desperate, brutal fight for survival. While Silas engaged one man near the woodpile, the other lunged for the cabin door. But Alara was no longer a frightened victim. She was a mother protecting her future. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the hearth, her knuckles white, and swung it with all her might against the doorframe, blocking the thug's entry. The man snarled, shoving his way inside. In the chaos, a lantern was knocked over. Flames licked up the dry wooden walls in an instant. The cabin, their sanctuary, was becoming a pyre. Smoke filled the small space, but through the haze, Alara saw her chance. Silas was locked in a struggle, overpowered. She saw his hunting rifle mounted on the wall. With a surge of adrenaline, she pulled it down. It was heavy, unfamiliar, but her resolve was ironclad. She burst out of the burning cabin, the heat scorching her back, and screamed, "Silas!" He saw the rifle in her hands, and his opponent's eyes widened in momentary distraction. It was all Silas needed. The fight ended with a sickening thud. Thorn, seeing his men defeated and the cabin engulfed in flames, his smug control utterly shattered, turned his horse and fled like the coward he was, disappearing back down the mountain trail. Alara and Silas stood together, panting, watching the flames consume their shelter. The fire was destroying the last remnants of their old lives, of their isolation and grief. And in the fiery glow, as the smoke cleared, Alara doubled over with a sharp cry. The baby was coming. As the sun began to cast its first golden rays over the scorched earth where the cabin once stood, a new sound mingled with the crackle of dying embers. The cry of a newborn baby. Silas, his hands still bearing the marks of the fight, had transformed from warrior to gentle guardian. He had guided Alara through the ordeal with a tenderness that spoke of his profound redemption, delivering the child into the world with the same hands he had once used to bury his friend. He wrapped the infant in his own singed but clean shirt and placed him in Alara's arms. She looked down at her son, and then up at Silas, her eyes shining with tears that were no longer born of sorrow, but of overwhelming cathartic joy. The fire had taken their shelter, but it had forged something far stronger in its place. A family. A resilient mother who had chosen forgiveness over vengeance, a redeemed protector who had found his purpose, and a child who was the living symbol of a future built not on a foundation of anger, but of unbreakable love and courage. They had lost everything, only to find they had everything they would ever need right there, in each other. What would you have done in her place? When every instinct cries out for revenge, what does it take to listen to the quieter voice that whispers of forgiveness? Alara looked at the man the world called a monster and saw a reflection of her own pain, her own loss. She chose to build a bridge across their shared grief instead of burning it down with hatred. And in doing so, she didn't just save him. She built a new world for her child, a world founded on the radical belief that compassion is a greater force than retribution. We are all faced with our own storms, our own impossible choices. How many of us possess the strength to see the humanity in those we are told to despise, and to choose the difficult, sunlit path of grace? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If this story of an unbreakable spirit touched your heart, please show your support with a like, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the incredible power of the human soul.